Loud. And we are recording. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, one of our live programs that we do on occasion. And we'll be doing more of these in the coming months as we get closer to opening. I'd like to start out by congratulating the New Orleans Saints on their recent football victory just a few minutes ago. So everyone here in New Orleans is very excited about that. Since we're doing a sports themed program, I thought I would mention that. I would ask you to remain muted just in case you have barking dogs or meowing cats or anything like that. It will help to be able to hear Richard. So let me start out by introducing our speaker for tonight. And right before I do that, I have an assignment for y'all, which is during this program, if you know of a Southern Jewish athlete, current, past, future, put it in the chat, because we're always trying to find information about the Southern Jewish experience. And of course, sports is part of not just the experience in the South, but all over the world. And so if you know of Southern Jewish athletes, just type the name or any information in the chat while we're all talking about tonight's topic. So Richard Neugass was born in Washington, D.C. in 1946, an early baby boomer. He went to public school there before completing a BA at Amherst College in 1968. He was drafted into the Army and was deployed to South Vietnam from 1969 to 1970. He worked in Saigon in an Army intelligence unit, very safe in those years in Saigon. He has been a nursing school teacher, a video conferencing pioneer with MCI, and an entrepreneur creating video memoirs for families and institutions. Richard is active in a lifelong learning institute at Dartmouth and in several community organizations that raise funds for nonprofits. He's married, has 2 children, and 5 grandchildren so far. Now, I can hear an echo of myself, so someone is probably not muted. So make sure you're all muted. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our main speaker for tonight, Richard Neugass. Take it away, Richard.
Thank you, folks. Good evening, everyone. My family, friends all over the place, Washington, D.C., Vermont, and elsewhere. I want to thank some people first, very briefly. There's a gentleman on this call named Mark Bowman who came to me several months ago and said, I was thrilled by the story of your father. And he's been searching for a venue to tell the story. He found Kenneth and MSJE with the help of a relative of mine, Margaret Epstein. So thanks to all of you for giving me this opportunity. And now a disclaimer. I am not a historian, but I am an expert in my father's story about the Olympics. And I did a writing piece about the Olympics, during which time I learned a lot more. So I'm not the expert, but there are lots of amazing stories, including my father, some of which I will cover. I want to read, before we get to the next slide, the letter that made him famous in this venue. This is the part. I have been advised on what I believe to be unimpeachable authority that the German pledges have not been kept. Under these circumstances, as an American citizen who believes sincerely in the cardinal tenet of freedom of religious of of religious worship embedded in the Constitution of the United States, I feel it to be my duty to express my unequivocal opinion that this country should not participate in the Olympic contests if they are held in Germany. In response to an inquiry from the committee in charge, I have already notified it that I will not participate in the Olympic Games next year. So, how did Herman Neugass get into this? First of all, today is his 106th birthday, born 1915. So, happy birthday, Dad. And I hope you enjoy hearing your story. Next slide.
All right, so here we go. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can all see some of this great story that Richard is going to tell. We are calling this program "A Southern Jew Boycotts Hitler's Olympics, the Herman Neugass Story." And we're going to start way at the beginning.
This is Dad at probably age 2 and 4. He was born in Mississippi, but soon after moved to New Orleans and lived there through his years at Tulane. His father. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
His father, Leo, was the youngest graduate of Tulane, age 16. He died, however, when my father was 12. His mother was one of 6 sisters and a brother. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Before we go on, where in New Orleans did he live? Did he grow up?
On St. Charles Avenue, not far from Tulane.
Very good. Okay.
So the next slide, you'll see the yearbook of Tulane, the Jambalaya. This was from 1934, his junior year. He had gone to hold on, back please.
Back.
A little bit about getting to Tulane. He had gone to Isidore Newman School. He was a star student and a star athlete. He played in every sport that they offered. And tennis was his best sport. So when he went to Tulane, next slide. When he went to Tulane, this is him in his freshman year. He was surprised in a way that he got in. He got in on a scholarship. He said that students at that time, good athletes, were rarely good students. So he was somewhat rare as a combination of both. And he also said that it was unusual for Jews to be star athletes. But at 18 years old, on the freshman track team, he started out for the going out for the tennis team. And in a practice, they had a 100-yard dash for conditioning. And he won handily. So the coach of the tennis team talked to the coach of the track team and said, "You ought to take a look at this guy." And there he was on the track team. He said that in tennis, he was a pinger, which he said is someone who can get every shot back, but not with a lot of power. So he could beat almost everyone except the best players who had both consistency and power. But he left tennis behind and track took over. Next slide. So this is him in 1934 winning at the 100-yard dash against Alabama, the Crimson Tide. Next slide.
Well, wait a second. First of all, I just want to say that these pictures are incredible. Are all these pictures from the yearbook?
This one is, several are,
Okay,
in addition to my personal files.
fantastic. And I'm just amazed, when I see athletes, historical pictures of athletes, and you see the kind of footwear that they ran in. Nowadays, everything is so cushioned and engineered. And back then it was just some leather, some simple leather shoes. So that's impressive.
And the track itself was a cinder track,
That's right.
which you won't find today.
That's right.
This is him at track meet with LSU. The Tulane and LSU were intense competitors. And that year, LSU were the national champions in track. So they had a very strong team. But the gentleman who's second place behind him is a gentleman named Slats Harden, who turned out won the 440 in the Olympics and was a superstar at LSU. Okay, next. This is a picture of his coach, Fritz Oakes. Dad adored him. Having lost his father, Fritz became the father figure, and they loved each other. He saw Dad as his star, and Dad was a very hardworking, dedicated runner. He said in a conversation many years ago that I really wanted to win. If I was in a race, I was going to win. Next slide. So he won big. He broke 2 records in Baton Rouge. His races were the 100-yard dash and the 220-yard dash. They don't run yards anymore. They run meters. In the Texas relays, he tied the world's record, 9.4 seconds. And I just want you to get a sense of how long that is. I'm going to start this timer, and you'll hear when 9 seconds is up. Go. Over. That's how long it took him to run 100 yards.
I'd still be in the blocks.
However, his record did not go in the record books because that day there was a 5-mile-per-hour wind, and that was noted. But he was still known as having tied the world's record. In 1935, in June, he went to the NCAA championships in Berkeley, California. He told me that he and his one teammate drove from New Orleans to California in the summer. No air conditioning. So what they did is they bought a block of ice and put it in front of the fan and got through the desert. At that meet, Jesse Owens won 4 events and scored 40 out of the 41.5 points that Ohio State won that day.
Hmm.
So you can start to see that Jesse is rising above pretty much everyone. 1 month earlier, at the Big Ten finals at the University of Michigan, he set or tied 4 world records. Probably the most outstanding single day in track history for any individual. He was an explosive starter, and Dad said I could keep up with him once we got out of the starting blocks, but I was already a bit behind. By the way, when he tied the world's record at 9-4, he said the starting gun went off a little before he anticipated. So he saw all the other runners head off, but he wanted to win, and he beat them all and set a tie to world's record. Okay, next slide. This is a letter that he received before the Olympics. It was known that he was a star runner in the Southeast Conference, and this letter asked if he would go on tour with other athletes to several countries. He did not go, but he still maintained his expert performances in the Southeast Conference. Okay, next. So here comes Avery Brundage. He was the president of the American Olympic Committee, in charge of okaying the US participation or not. Previously, he said publicly that the US would not participate if the Germans did not stop their discrimination against Jews. Several months after that, he went to Germany with several other men on the committee and was sweet talked as he was taken around Germany. He was a pro-German American. As a matter of fact, he was a member of the America First Committee, which was known as a pro-German organization. There was an intense effort to boycott the Olympics in '35, especially. And it came down to a key vote in December that would they go or not go. And he led the committee to accept the invitation. They won by only 2 votes. Otherwise, that committee would have boycotted the Olympics altogether.
And Richard, let me just remind everyone that in 1935, this is 2 years after Hitler came to power, the Nazi regime passes the first of the Nuremberg laws, stripping Jews of citizenship and the ability to teach in the universities, and eventually everything from you can't own a bicycle and you can't have a radio and you can't sell to non-Jews and you can't marry an Aryan. So already, the discrimination was beginning and harsh.
And that German promise to treat Jews fairly was a sham. They had already kicked all Jews out of their sports clubs. The way to get to the German Olympics was by excelling in those sports clubs. So all Jews were banned, and they created their own pickup track fields. They worked on preparing a track in a normal field and practiced that way. Okay.
Oh, okay. So this next slide sort of shows the the level. This is right after the Olympics in '36, but it's an article from the Daily News where Avery is he speaks to 20,000 men at a German Day rally in New York and says that you know, the Hitler regime is a good thing because it's stamping out communism. This country could use a little of the same, he said. So this really shows you his pro-German stance even into 1936.
He was a rabid anti-communist.
Yes.
So on the right is the letter that Dad sent. And here's the story behind the letter. The letter on the left, sent by Avery Brundage, went out to the top athletes, track and otherwise, asking if you qualify for the team, would you go to Germany? Enclosed is a postcard with yes or no. Please mark your answer. Dad did that and didn't tell anyone. He sent the postcard in, so he made his decision without any public knowledge at all. The next day, there was an interview in the sports section in the Times-Picayune where an LSU runner was asked, well, would you go if they, would you go? You're Jewish. And the man said, why, of course I'll go. Neugass is Jewish and he's going. That prompted my father to write the letter on the right the next day, in which he stated his principled response to this invitation.
And
So
I have some of those quotes pulled out a little bit. You want me to show those?
Please.
Okay, so here's a couple of the lines, and Richard, why don't you read those again?
I personally would not have participated in such games in any country in which the fundamental principle of religious liberty is violated as flagrantly and inhumanely as it has been in Germany. So I feel it to be my duty to express my unequivocal opinion that this country should not participate in the Olympic contests if they are held in Germany. Someone asked, so what was the response of people to this public statement? My father got many letters in response to this. Some objected to his stance, others saluted it. What he said is that the Jews in New Orleans and the South did not want to, quote, make waves. They didn't want controversy. And Dad thought that he didn't want to make this public and create more controversy. But it came out because he had to verify why he had chosen as he did. So my father dropped out of the discussions about the Olympics. Next slide, please.
And he was 20 years old at this point, correct?
That's right.
So a 20-year-old who's never left town, right? I mean, he was born in Mississippi, but raised in New Orleans. Here he has an opportunity to try out for and probably make the Olympic team, travel internationally to be on the world stage, and quietly by himself, he makes the decision that that's not something he can do. Do I get that? Do I have that right?
Absolutely. I
Yes.
asked him, did you consult with anyone? Did you talk to anyone? And he said no. I checked off no on the postcard and sent it in. And he was not about to tell other people, but his hand was forced.
Hey, Richard, do you have any idea on how his parents directed him? I mean, as a 20-year-old, I probably would have been on the phone to my folks.
His father had passed.
Uh-huh.
He was living just with his mother. And his mother was, she loved what was happening and was honored by his success. But she was not one to get advice from. So he did it on his own. And I honor him for his decision. So after that letter went out, it went as a letter to the editor of the Times-Picayune. And it was picked up by the New York Times, and they published this article stating what he said about his reason for not going. Okay.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about these Olympics, because I think you know more than most people do, and you might have something to tell us about them.
Well, first of all, in this picture, besides Hitler, next to him is Theodor Lewald, who had been on the International Olympic Committee for many years and whose grandfather was Jewish. He was not a practicing Jew at all. However, Hitler wanted to can him.
I had a piece. Bring me another piece.
Did someone?
No. Someone said something because they're not muted. Go ahead.
Okay. So the international community balked at that and insisted that he not be fired. And indeed, he wasn't. So he's pictured here at the Olympics. Next slide.
And this was, I mean, these Olympics were really Hitler's opportunity, right, to show the world, a world that was in the middle of a depression, that, you know, the grandeur that the Nazi regime had created, correct?
Yes, and you can see the PR value in these pictures, and indeed in Berlin. The Nazi symbol was everywhere. They had all over Germany, there were signs that said Jews not allowed, Juden verboten. So they were kicked out of professional organizations. They were not allowed to join organizations, certainly not the sports clubs. And when the foreign visitors came, all those signs disappeared. And the rabid newspaper Der Stürmer, which every other page denigrated Jews, disappeared from the streets for about a week until the end of the Olympics. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So here's Jesse. Jesse won 4 gold medals, the first person to win that many gold medals in track. And below his picture on the winning stand is Jesse and a man named Look at it. Long, Carl Ludwig Long. He competed with Jesse in the long jump. And there's a story that the two of them became fast friends. And even during the competition, Long came up and showed Jesse something about his approach run. And Jesse listened and won that event as well as 3 others. But the 4th medal was the key. The morning of the relay race, the last day of the Olympics, the American team met and the coaches announced who would be in the relay race. They announced, next slide, please. They announced that these 2 Jewish runners, Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, would not be in the relay. This surprised everyone because they had been practicing throughout the preparation, throughout the boat ride over in relays. It was standard practice, but not a rule, that in the Olympic trials, the first 3 runners would be individual runners, and the next 4 would be relay runners. And Glickman and Stoller were among those last 4. So everyone assumed, oh, of course they will run. So there was great shock in that room when that announcement came. And Jesse Owens said, Coach, let Sam and Marty run. I'm tired. I've already gotten my medals. Let them run. The coach looked at him and said, you be quiet. I'm the coach. And that was the end. They did not run. Next slide. Instead, these 4 gentlemen won. Owens on the left, Ralph Metcalf next to him, and 2 USC runners, Wyckoff and Draper. The head coach, Cromwell, was the head coach of USC. So there's some reason to think he put his boys in. But everyone acknowledged that this was, he kept the Jews out. And the theory is that Brundage conferred with Goebbels and the other leaders who said, don't run the Jews. So these 4 ran. They tied the Olympic record. They didn't set a world record, and they won. They won by 15 yards. But there was a judge watching the race who almost disqualified them because of the baton toss. When you pass the baton, you have just so many yards within which to pass the baton. And if you do it outside of that designated space, you make a foul and you're disqualified. That judge hesitated for a minute, but did not call the foul. So the Americans won. Jesse Owens won his 4th medal, and the Jews were excluded. Many years later, the International Olympic Committee awarded Glickman and Stoller, who had passed, gold medals, acknowledging the funny business. that went on.
Yeah.
Next slide.
Well, let me ask you a quick question here.
Yes.
Did your dad ever tell you how he felt following the Olympics as they were? Of course, they weren't televised, but he could hear things on the radio. He could read things in the newspapers, maybe even newsreels at the cinema.
He he was not totally surprised that the Jewish runners did not run. What I realized is that he might have been in this picture. He might have been, if he had run in the top three, he would have been in the individual races, not the relay. So a lot of ironies and yes or no.
Mm.
He was philosophical about it. At that time when we talked, I don't think he was ready to admit the hurt or the disappointment.
Mm. Okay.
These are two of his medals from running. The SAAU is the Southern Conference of the AAU, and he won the 100 at that time meter race and the 220 meter. So he was the fastest guy in the South in those two events.
Yeah, but tell tell everybody what he did with these.
He had it in a picture frame at the top of our stairs at home. So every time I went upstairs, I saw his medals and just reinforced my pride. And my pride not only in his accomplishments and his speed and determination, but in his stance. And it's funny that because of that, his story will live on. Wyckoff has disappeared in the so-called dustbin of history.
Mm.
So by not running, he earned his fame.
Okay.
Next slide. So shifting a bit, when he graduated from Tulane, soon after he married my mother. This is their wedding in the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, D.C. And he moved to Washington because of discrimination against Jews in the following way. He was a math whiz and was asked to join an actuarial firm in New Orleans. They didn't know that he was Jewish. No, the name Neugass is not obviously Jewish. But when they found out, they said to him, Mr. Neugass, we'd love to have you work in our firm, but we can't put you in the partner track because the Actuarial Society in the United States does not allow Jews. So his future in that field was ended, and he moved to Washington and worked for the department store that my mother's family had started.
Okay.
This is him at age approximately 50. He had quite a career. Again, something that I found honorable. After Martin Luther King was killed, there were riots in Washington as in other places. And the impact on him was he quit his job at Landsberg's and went to work for the Mayor's Economic Development Council, counseling new entrepreneurs. So he was giving back in that way. Another way he gave back was that he loved collecting stamps. We had many an evening looking at stamps and putting them in albums. Out of that love, he took on a national project called Stamps for the Wounded, in which he collected stamps and distributed them to VA hospitals. The idea was that paraplegics or people who were not ambulatory would have an activity that was already set up. He sent the stamps and albums, and they had recreational activities in hospitals all through the United States.
Did your dad, was he a fit fellow throughout the rest of his life? Was he active? Did he run? Did he play tennis?
Well, he played tennis a bit. Golf became his main sport, but he played with me until I got good enough to beat him. That ended his playing tennis.
I understand. All right, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about this this next chapter, this next Olympic chapter in his life.
Right. So
can I ask Richard something? And
sure.
I don't remember you running track at Amherst.
No, I never took up track. Tennis was my sport, and I did play. I did play on the varsity team.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. No, track. I think it was too intimidating going up against a world record holder. Anyway, his story disappeared largely until 1980, when Carter boycotted the Moscow Olympics. That was in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Irony, here we are mired in Afghanistan. That was at the end of 1979. It was a terrible war. The Russian army lost lots of people, and they finally got out. Next slide.
Yep.
This is in response to, this was an announcement of Carter's decision. And there was a lot of talk about, should we boycott? Come on, let's send our athletes there and show them. This is exactly what the athletes of 1936 felt. In fact, Jesse Owens was urged by the NAACP not to go. They said, you should stand on principle and boycott. But Jesse, rightfully so, I believe, said, no, I'm going to show them what I can do. And he did. But this story in 1980, he reinvigorated Dad's story. And that resulted in press that showed what had happened. Next slide. This is on the field of the 1980 Olympics. This shows a letter that my father received, signed by Jimmy Carter from the White House. This was not anything to do with running, but his Stamps for the Wounded project. He received this same kind of letter from Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and George Bush. So I have on White House stationery a facsimile of this same letter. Next
Nice.
slide. This is one of the articles that appeared in 1980 at the time of the US boycott. And his story was revived to the point of the Jewish Historical Society in Washington, D.C. created a sports hall of fame. And Dad was one of 3 inductees, the first in that organization.
Very nice. All right. And now?
So Dad graduated in 1935, June 12th, 1935. So he was finished college and his collegiate running career. And people have asked, well, why didn't you continue? At that time, there were no after graduate running clubs. That happened later in the United States. So there was no place for him to practice. He didn't run anymore. He did mentor track and field runners in the DC area and showed them technique and so forth. But that was the extent of his connection to running. Next. So Tulane, in their athletic office on campus, honored their best athletes. Here were the All-Americans, mostly football, but Dad was one. His plaque is circled, but you can't see it very well. But in the next slide, there it is. Unfortunately, Katrina destroyed that building, and it has not been rebuilt. And this Tulane Hall of Fame has not been reconstituted. 1996, the U.S. Holocaust Museum mounted a special exhibit called the Nazi Olympics. And they told the whole story of the Olympics. And Dad was one of the featured individuals. I was invited to speak at the opening, along with 3 others, including Marty Glickman and a woman named Margaret Lambert, whose maiden name was Gretel Bergman. She has an interesting story. She was told by the Germans that, yes, you can be on the team. And just before the sailing for the Olympics, they sent her a letter saying, no, you're not going to be on our team. She was the champion high jumper, close to the best in the world. That's my son, Ruben. And we were both extremely honored to be part of that exhibit. Okay.
All right. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let me stop sharing here for a minute. Richard, this is fascinating. This is amazing. This was really great to be able to hear from you as a firsthand witness to this man's life, or at least the part where you were alive, and for you to share these stories that he shared with you. I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to say, if you had to say what was the lesson or the impact that your father's decision in 1935 had on your life, could you put that into words?
Principle is the most important thing, and integrity, personal integrity, is the most important thing in life. And I honored his choice far above his actually going. I also learned that keeping quiet at critical times is not always the best strategy. I wish that he had come out publicly and gotten behind the boycott movement before he had to. So the two lessons are integrity and principles, number one. And number two is there is a time to speak out.
Very good. Very good. This has been wonderful. And we have made it under an hour, which is great. There were a few people. I started out the show by saying, if you know of a Southern Jewish athlete, put it in the comments or in the chat. And several people did. We have some fencers and Bill Goldberg, the wrestler, who was also a football player before that. We have a soccer star and golf people. So thank you all for adding to our list of Southern Jewish athletes. One person asked the question, how did your parents meet?
The 1939 World's Fair, New York City. It was a blind date.
How did your
World's Fair?
How did your grandparents get to Tulane, to that area? How did they get to the Deep South?
His father and mother were New Orleans natives.
Really?
And Tulane was an obvious choice for Dad. Plus, his father, Leo, had graduated at age 16 from Tulane and loved the college.
So your grandparents were not immigrants, then it was your great-grandparents that were immigrants?
Yes.
And they ended up in the South, which is unusual, I would think.
Well, we have a whole museum about that.
Which you should definitely.
Did I miss that? I must have missed that. Sorry.
Well, this is if you came in late, this is
I did.
Sponsored by the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, which will be opening later this year. Everyone who is on this right now, I'll be sending you an email probably sometime tomorrow with a link to this program on our YouTube channel. It will also have information about signing up for our newsletter if you haven't already. And also a link to support the museum. If you like this kind of programming, if you think that the stories of Jews in the South are something important to share with the world, then support the museum. And I would just like to take this opportunity, Richard, to thank you once again for your time, for sharing your stories. This has been great. And I hope that all of you who are watching will agree. Maybe we could all give a little round of applause for Richard and his father's story. And I look forward to seeing everyone on our next program. We'll be doing a great program in February, but you'll have to wait for the newsletter to find out what that's going to be all about. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I'm going to say so long to everybody. Be well, be healthy, wear your masks, and take care. Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Richard, this is Harvey. I got to say is who knew?